Larry, we've got judicial hijinks afoot, and I'm very glad you're here with us to explain what's going on, because it's a little bit complicated. How you doing?
Doing great. Thank you, Jason. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Before we get underway, I do want to remind people that they can, follow you on X at Larry E. Klayman. And also, Larry is on Substack. We have begun doing shows on Substack, so people can now support Freedom Watch and Larry over at larryklayman.substack.com. You can see these videos and other posts from Larry. But Larry, there's like so many cases against Trump. And like I said, I think a lot of people don't even understand the details of what's going on. Where should we begin?
Right now, Jason, we're approaching 200 lawsuits that have been filed by Democrats and leftists in federal courts, in their courthouses, where they're likely to draw, assuming it happens by random, which is really not happening. It's cooked from within, generally speaking, who gets assigned. You can see that with Judge Boasberg in D.C. He got the last 4 Trump cases. That's odds of over 1 trillion to 1 that it's random. But that's what we're dealing with right now, is that Trump is being blocked in most of these cases at a lower court level because they got a leftist Democrat appointed judge. He's fighting back. It's going to take time to go through the courts. Even the U.S. Supreme Court is making nonsensical rulings that no one understands what they're saying. For instance, we had Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Coney Barrett come out against the president the other day. They are closet leftists, liberals, whatever you want to call them, turncoats. Maybe that's a good word. And they basically said that we should facilitate, the United States, the return of the Tren de Aragua terrorist back to the United States from El Salvador. Facilitate. No one knows what they meant by that. The president of El Salvador said, we're not facilitating anything. He's staying here. President Trump and his administration said, well, we're not facilitating. And it's stuck there. And apparently the Supreme Court, really didn't want to take a position. So they just issued gobbledygook that no one can understand in a legal context. Now, all these other cases are winding their way through the courts. Some of them will get to the Supreme Court, but they're trying to throw a monkey wrench into what President Trump's agenda is. And that's why it's important to support Freedom Watch at freedomwatchusa.org with tax-deductible contributions, I might add, because they need help at the Justice Department. Pam Bondi is inundated. She's swamped with cases, and we need to come in an amicus, a friend of the court capacity, and help out and do other things. For instance, start our citizens' grand juries and hold some of these judges like Boasberg, make him the poster boy to hold them accountable criminally before the American people for violating his oath of office. These judges are violating their oath of office. That's criminal. Not all federal judges are bad, but most of them are politicians in robes. And in particular, on the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia and Boston, Massachusetts, and Seattle, Washington, and these very leftist cities around the United States. We need to confront them head on, because we got the head of a judiciary committee, Jim Jordan, who is a closet rhino, who doesn't do anything. He just goes on Fox News with rolled up sleeves and no sports jacket and raises money for himself and other Republicans by promising what they're going to do, but then they do nothing. They haven't impeached one judge since he's been chairman in 8 years, not even started a proceeding, not even called them up to testify, to hold their feet to the carpet. They've done nothing. Now, there's 1 or 2 congressmen who have initiated articles of impeachment, but that's not going to happen because you need 60 votes in the Senate. And then you have this phony legislation, which the Republicans put forth, that injunctions will apply only to the parties in front of the court. Well, that's always been the case. They say, well, that's curing nationwide injunctions. That's not curing anything. In any event, they know full well that that won't get through Congress either, because you need 60 votes in the Senate to have it pass. So we've got a situation now where these judges are running wild. It's like frat girls running wild. And they are wreaking havoc on the Trump agenda, and we need to do something about it. So please go to freedomwatchusa.org, join our Justice League. We're also commencing a DOLA, Department of Judicial and Legal accountability to hold these judges accountable.
Yeah, and it's important that people remember Freedom Watch is a 501c3, and it's a tax deductible donation there. Larry, it's interesting. They've got a 501c3 over in the Signalgate case, but we don't need to talk about that right now. There's so many cases going on. I made this image today, Larry, because you told me you wanted to talk about judicial hijinks. And so I don't know. My mind goes wild with the AI now. We've got Boasberg riding a bicycle with a parrot. And all these other judges, as you said, this El Salvador guy, they said he's an MS-13 member, and they didn't just allege that. It was adjudicated in a court. The guy has been in the United States. He's been kicked out previously. That lawyer, Stephen Miller, who I think is the deputy chief of staff, he's very smart. Did you see what he was saying?
Deputy chief of policy. I hope to speak with him soon. He's a Duke alumnus like I am, and he was a rebel when he was there. I was a rebel in my own way. I mean, it was back during the Vietnam War. Nobody was too rebellious at that time at Duke. Duke was a conservative place, but today it's not. Today it's the Berkeley of the South, as many of these universities are. But he is standing up to what's going on. He doesn't pull any punches. He says what he thinks, and I admire that. And he's calling the shots. A lot of the shots that are coming out of the Trump White House are coming from him. I believe, Trump has been sanctioning a number of large law firms, particularly Washington law firms, like Covington and Burling, like Wilmer and Hale, like Sussman Godfrey and others. He's been barring them from doing federal business. He's been taking away their security clearances. And frankly, it's about time that someone pushed back on these law firms, because basically what they are bag carriers. These particular law firms are bag carriers for the left, for the Biden agenda, and for others. And of course, there's Perkins Coie as well, with Mark Elias, who I've been up a number of times. These people are just, I can't even imagine what you can call them. They're just not patriotic to the United States. I'll be diplomatic right now, and Trump's taking appropriate action to clip their wings.
But Larry, he did something that I don't really understand. He made some kind of deal where these law firms are now giving some number of hours worth millions of dollars of their time. Why would he trust these law firms that are trying to screw him over?
I think he's making a point. He's basically making them get down on their knees and beg for forgiveness. No racial connotation, but it's like a minstrel show. I mean, he's throwing coins and having them dance, basically, essentially. So I think he's making a point. And yes, I mean, they can get them to do innocuous work that has nothing to do with politics. We'll see how much they can get out of them, however, because these law firms are fundamentally Democrat. They're fundamentally corrupt, in my opinion. I've been up against them. I've been up against all of them. I have them in cases ranging from the PGA Tour case in Palm Beach to many other cases that I've had them in. And, it's the old Woody Allen phrase taken from Groucho Marx. I remember when I was a young lawyer in Washington, when I first got there, and I would interview, and they would say, well, you didn't go to Harvard, you didn't go to Yale, you went to Emory Law School, come back some other time, we'll keep your resume on file. And then years later, when I was very successful with my law firm, they would come to me because they wanted my accounts. They wanted the accounts receivable. And they would say, well, why don't we merge? And I basically would say, excuse the French, fuck you. Okay, what do I need you for? So this is who they are. They're money-making machines. They're in the hip pocket, generally speaking, of the Democrats and the left. There are some Republicans. They have some token Republicans every now and then. And they're bagmen. Basically they go around. There was one firm, Patton Boggs and Blow, that had a good name with the blow actually at the end, because the fact is that's what they were doing. Figuratively speaking, with regard to congressmen and senators, they would line their pockets with campaign contributions and then call in the chits. That's generally what these law firms do. They call in the chits for their clients. Hire me, I can wire it for you, pay us a lot of money, and then we'll generate campaign contributions, and we'll have these congressmen and senators do what you want. And then, of course, they also nominate. They're responsible for getting judges nominated. They're clearinghouses for that. Wilmer Hale, for instance, as just last time I checked a few years ago, got an Obama judge on the court, and then they got, a Republican appointed judge on the court. So they can say to their clients, hey, we got these judges in our hip pocket. We can go either way, or
And that's
ACDC.
Robert Mueller's law firm, isn't it? Wilmer Hale?
Yeah, Wilmer Hale. That was good.
So, that's the thing. Larry, we've got all this crossover between FBI, Robert Mueller as special counsel, private law firms. I've recently been reading about critarchy or critocracy, which is a system of rule by biblical judges, but just in the sense of, rule by judges. It's kind of what we're under right now, isn't it?
Exactly. And, I've said it many, many times on your show and on mine, in my podcast. It's in my book, It Takes a Counter-Revolution, Wake Up America. The one before that, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. I go through a number of judges, and I go through the history of how federal judges came into being, Article 3 judges. And Thomas Jefferson, who was in Paris at the time as our ambassador, sent back a letter to the framers saying, we should not have federal judges. We don't need federal judges. We have state court judges. Federal judges, unelected, unaccountable to the people, would become despots and tyrants, no more honest than any other man, he wrote, causing us to shed the blood of patriots again. Yet every 20 years or so, what's a few thousand dead to refresh the tree of liberty? It's the natural manure of government. And of course, he didn't want to see anybody dead or hurt. He didn't want to see physical violence, neither do I. But he was predicting that these judges would become the biggest threat to our republic and our democratic system. And in fact, that's what they have become. And it's ironic that we broke away from England in large part because of its legal system. It took back our criminal law system to the court of St. James. King George III had his judges rubber stamp his edicts that were illegal, in the opinion of the colonies. And therefore, we created a new nation. In the Declaration of Independence, it says, and I'm paraphrasing, when in the course of human events, the sovereign no longer represents the people, we have a right to alter or abolish the government and to form a new government by and for the people with equal rights for everyone in pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. The judges on the court of King James violated our right to liberty and also to, living in freedom. They were the ones that enforced the king's illegal edicts. Yet, fast forward to today. Those judges, by the way, had immunity. The king gave them immunity. No one could sue them. No one could touch them. They were free to do as the king told them to do. Now, today, we have leftist judges on the bench and some closet liberals like Chief Justice Roberts and Coney Barrett, the so-called right, which they're not really. And these judges are doing the bidding of the establishment. And we saw it even during the 2020 elections. After that, Trump's own picks for the court, by and large, did not stand up for him and give him a fair hearing as to whether there was fraud that occurred during that election. And of course, these law firms that are being retaliated against now by being banned from federal work and having their security clearances taken away, they've been working on, fighting Trump for years, preventing him from getting equal protection and due process, smearing him, defending cases where big media has defamed him. Law firms like Davis, Wright, Tremaine, and Schulman Fugate down there in Florida have been defending people who have defamed the president. Davis, Wright, and Schulman Fugate defended George Stephanopoulos and defended ABC when George Stephanopoulos published that Trump had raped a woman who finally figured out she was raped 40 years later. She didn't know it for 40 years. She couldn't figure it out. So, these people are getting their comeuppance, from Trump. The leftist judges will probably step in and they'll probably prevent it. One of them already has, with regard to Perkins Coie, who ran.
Wait, Larry, look, I didn't realize they were agreeing to give $15 million to Donald Trump's presidential library. I just saw this here on AP. So Trump's going to have a presidential library. That's bad news. Charles is going to be upset.
Why is that?
Because again, it comes back to these 501c3s. And if you look at the Obama Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, it's just rife with abuse. And I mean, we're talking about Boasberg. There's a whole lot of stuff, Larry, that's going on the docket there in the Signalgate case. In about 10 minutes, you and I are going to transition over to a sponsor exclusive segment. People are going to be able to join us there on, not on Freedom Watch, but on LarryKlayman.substack.com. If people aren't subscribed to Larry yet, now is a good time to do that. Larry is now on Substack. Larry, you're very media savvy. You've always been kind of quick to get onto all the new media and everything. And so we don't want to talk about Bill Maher, right?
Well, we can talk generally. The deposition is currently under a confidential seal. It will come out. And I find it interesting that Bill Maher arranges through Kid Rock, because he arranged it himself, a meeting with the president 2 days before I deposed him for Laura Loomer. Laura was there with me. And that was to blunt the reaction to being deposed. And while I may be media savvy, there's not one major publication that picked up the fact that Bill Maher was being deposed. That's a pretty big event. And I can tell you, when the deposition does come out, it's going to be very damning, and it's going to be also entertaining, because he was very disrespectful towards me and his lawyer, Kate Bulger of Davis Wright Tremaine, who I mentioned before, who actually advertises that they're anti-Trump on their website, if you can believe that.
Wow.
There's an article up there, talks about Trump's least favorite lawyers, written by Hollywood Reporter a few years ago, and I was the antidote to that. There was a little sub-article about me who was on the other side. It's amazing to me that they were disrespectful while it was on video, and you'll see it. But I can't get into the substance of it publicly at this time. I can just tell you it was very favorable towards Laura Loomer. This case was filed in Ocala, Florida, which is a very religious area. And it's where I had my campaign headquarters for a while when I ran for the U.S. Senate in Florida back in the early 2000s. And I don't think they're going to enjoy Bill Maher's humor there. And it's really not humor at all, as a matter of fact. He's no comedian. He's a pundit. If you ever watch him on Real Time, and before that, Politically Incorrect, which when he was semi-rational I used to be on, he reads his lines. He can't deliver a line. He has to read them. And when he does ad lib, it doesn't come off terribly well. So this is, it'll be interesting for people to watch his demeanor at this deposition, because it's not respectful in any way.
Now, Larry, something quite interesting. Look at this. Davis Wright Tremaine has taken away that webpage that was saying that they're Trump's least favorite lawyers. Perhaps, as you said, they're engaged in some sort of campaign to blunt the effectiveness of your deposition of Mr. Maher. Let's go back in time using the Wayback Machine to see what that article... there it is, Larry. Magically, it reappears. Meet Trump's least favorite lawyers defending CNN. So they've taken this down from their website. What do you think of that?
Well, I made a point of it, okay? Laura's made a point of it. And yes, that's what they market themselves with. They market themselves being Democrat, far left, anti-Trump, anti-conservative. That's been the case. One of their partners, Laura Handman, is the former wife of Harold Ickes, the deputy chief of staff.
Oh my God, that's crazy.
Clinton White House. and I've challenged them on a number of occasions in putting forward misstatements to courts and everything else. And that's who they are. They're anti-Trumpers. They hate conservatives. Wow. And so they were advertising that just a few days ago. It was up there on their website.
Amazing. Wow. Well, we still have a lot more to discuss, Larry, with regard to these highly politicized cases that have been brought against Trump. We've got just a few more minutes here before we go to the sponsor exclusive segment, but I have prepared, this is not a comprehensive list, but I mean, there's so many cases, it's almost impossible to track. But I put together this list here, and what we're going to be able to do is just go over some of these more kind of controversial cases. I've got it listed by judge. Here we got Boasberg. He's dealing with both the Alien Enemies Act case with this, this is the thing. It's very confusing. We've got Trende Aragua people. That's this one. Then we've got that MS-13 guy going to El Salvador that Trump was meeting with the president yesterday. This is also the same judge, Boasberg. He's presiding over American Oversight versus Hegseth et al. That's Signalgate. Then we've got a judge in Maryland. This is the case. This is the Salvadorian guy. There's so many cases here, Larry. We're going to have an opportunity to spend some time going through these, and maybe you can help people kind of understand what's going on.
Yeah, well, it's all cooked. And of course, Boasberg, like I said, got 4 cases involving Trump. He's the chief judge. He's obviously assigning them to himself. It's supposed to go into a wheel of fortune and come out randomly, but obviously that's not the case. And you never find that out because they cover it up. Let me give you another example of a quick cover-up. You remember the Dobbs decision on abortion, on Roe v. Wade. Someone obviously leaked that from the Supreme Court to Politico. Josh Gerstein was the reporter, who I wound up suing later for another reason. He defamed me. No one's ever found out who leaked it. It's been covered up by the Supreme Court. Good old John Roberts has covered the whole thing up. And he probably doesn't let the FBI in there. Of course, it wasn't favorable for a leak, to uncover a leak until Trump became president. Kash Patel became FBI director. But we'll never find out. They cover these things up. And so talk about random assignment, forget that concept. That's for public consumption, not in reality.
He addressed that actually in the hearing. I went to the first hearing in Signalgate, and he gave a very complicated explanation that frankly pointed out that it wasn't random. He said that they have different decks of cards and that they put, criminal, civil, and bankruptcy in the different decks, and then that they assign them so that there's an even number going to each judge. And I was like, wait a minute, what you're describing is the opposite of random. Random is a case comes in.
Yeah, there is an aspect of that when, there's a new judge that's appointed or a judge leaves, they kind of spread around the cases. So it's evenly.
It wasn't random.
Divided, but that's not random. That's not random at all. I'll take it because, we're going to even out the docket.
That's what I mean. It's just not random. Larry, they do whatever they want all around.
Excuse the French. It's bullshit. Okay, it's bullshit.
Is.
Yeah, it's bullshit.
But big news, Larry, because my motion for leave to file the amicus brief is on the docket. Now, there's something very strange that happened. We'll get into details when we make our way over to the sponsor-exclusive segment, but they held my brief. You see here it says filed April 9th, entered 5 days later, April 14th. The judge gave the order to alter the judgment on the 9th. It's entered on the 9th, and the order is terminated. And they waited 5 days because they had this hearing. There was a status conference on April 10th, and I believe the judge did not want all the public and press that was there for the status conference to contemplate the contents of this explosive amicus brief. Because what I'm basically saying in here is that the case needs to go away. The plaintiff doesn't have standing. The whole thing is out of order, as Pacino would say.
Yeah.
They don't care, though, Larry. They don't care at all.
No, they don't care. They do what they want. And again, it gets back to the old issue of immunity and the fact that they're untouchables. The Supreme Court gave all the federal judges and themselves immunity. So whatever they do, they can't be looked at. If you file an ethics complaint with a judicial council that's supposed to look at it, it's their colleagues in the same courthouse gets thrown into the trash. Yeah. And in all the years that I've been a lawyer, and I've filed many of these just on principle, is that when they respond to you and they, in fact, deny any kind of investigation or anything to that effect, frequently the facts are cooked. They're not the accurate facts. And they say, well, they can give you a certain amount of time to appeal. And that's, completely a ruse, because they never hold anyone accountable. As I think I said last time, there was a judge out west that allegedly raped a woman. They let him go too, So,
wow.
It's a club. It's a club. It's a club with the congressmen and senators. It's a club with the judges. It's a club with the big law firms in Washington, D.C. It's a giant club. And, one of Trump's acts should be frankly, to move the capital out of Washington. Let's start over again. Let's put it in the South or put it in the West. Let's basically just cement the place over and move on.
Well, Larry, we're going to make our way over to the sponsor exclusive segment. I hope that people will join us there by going to larryklayman.substack.com. People can also see the simulcast on all of the Crowdsource the Truth sponsorship channels. We'll be right back in 5 minutes. There's a lot more to discuss, all the details of these cases and more. Stay with us, everybody, and thanks to everyone who's sponsoring the show. We'll be right back.